Hey, welcome to Hot Takes. I'm your host, James Scott, here to analyze anything and everything interesting. Let's dig into today's topics.
And we're back with another episode. Always happy to be on the podcast. Always happy to be helping James out. James is the man with the plan. James, tell me what is new. Let the audience know what is new this week in the world of baseball.
Well, I narrowly got beat in fantasy baseball, but nobody cares about that. So Dexter Fowler is out like up to 6 months with some sort of Achilles thing, I think it is. So he's, not going to be the 9-hole hitter for the Angels, which is kind of a bummer. We've been talking about the Angels lineup quite a bit. I do not think that this really changes their projection that much because they have Luis Rengifo, who needs at-bats. They need to put him somewhere. They have Joe Adell, who's one of the best prospects in all the minor leagues. You got Brandon Marsh, who's one of the best outfield prospects as well in all the minor leagues. So they have guys who can fill in. And, at least, at the beginning of the season, since Pujols has kind of, at least in spring training, been, back and forth with regards to Walsh, maybe you could put Walsh out there and get Walsh some at-bats as well. I think that eventually Walsh will take over for Pujols at first base, or at least in some sort of platoon. But at least while we're pre that situation and Walsh is still finding his footing, I mean, he has been hitting some pretty key home runs for them recently. I could see him getting some time out there as well. But either way, we're talking about the 9th hitter in their lineup. We're talking about the worst spot in there. I don't want to say worst because Pujols might make that, interesting, but it's a spot in the lineup where they're not going to be really needing it to be dominant. Fowler was very much of a lineup continuer. He turned the lineup over, and now you're going to be having, instead of necessarily that, or maybe you can have a different guy in that role, but you're going to have young kids who are trying to prove themselves among some of the best talents in the major leagues. Iglesias has been around for a bit. Trout has been around for a bit. Upton has been around for a bit. Rendon has been around for a bit. Pujols, Kurt Suzuki. I think it's a good idea. Even Fletcher's been around, I think, three years now. It's not really 2 full seasons. I think 1.5 seasons. The point is he's played in three seasons, not 3 full seasons, but he's played in 3 seasons. So even Fletcher's been around a bit. Him and Ohtani are probably the newest members of, that lineup. And, Fletcher's very much found a role as a kind of slap hitter. And if you look at Ohtani is one of the better DHs out there. He's lit everyone he's faced on fire as a hitter or a pitcher since spring training. So I don't think there's going to be very much pressure on a Brandon Marsh or on a Joe Adell or on a Luis Rengifo or on a Jared Walsh, whichever one ends up assuming at bats right now. However, it does create an opportunity where if Walsh, say, takes over first base, like we're expecting, and Luis Rengifo keeps to that super utility role and gets a full season of at-bats doing that, that maybe Walsh or not Walsh, rather Marsh or Adell, Brandon Marsh or Joe Adell, maybe they come forward and finally emerge. Maybe they are now big league ready. If that's the case, then you're looking at, some of the best prospects in all the minor leagues, being just, given the opportunity to produce. And there's enough competition there where I think you're going to be able to keep some of these guys within themselves. It's not really a key place in the lineup. You're not going to be having him bat 1 through 6, depending on how you're going about it and depending on what day. They're either batting 7, 8, or 9, depending on how you want to turn the lineup over. Most likely 8 or 9. So with that kind of competition, without that much pressure, with that much extra force in the lineup, I don't know. I think it might be ideal conditions to have a guy prove themselves. So on one side, it kind of stinks because Dexter Fowler's career is probably getting close to being over now after not really doing much in St. Louis the last few years, after being, I believe he's like 35 or 36 years old now. And now with this kind of injury, I mean, I could see a team get him really inexpensive, like on a 1-year deal, and just give him a chance, in a corner outfield spot. Probably, like I could see the Rockies. We talked about the Rockies, I think, in our last one. Or no, the one before our last one, rather. I think I could see the Rockies bring him back. He came up in their system. So I could totally see them, bring him back, needing the outfield help that they need, needing that, help period that they need. But I don't expect much more out of his career. And I hope he proves me wrong, because this is a guy who's a switch hitter who, when he, was doing his thing, he was a 20-20 guy, 20 homers, 20 stolen bases. He was capable of playing center field, although I always liked him better in a corner because I felt like he played too far in when he was in center field. If he had played farther back, he probably would have been a lot more effective. In fact, in spring training in right field, when he was playing right field, I saw somebody hit a ball that he totally misjudged and it went by him. And if he had played further back, he would have actually been able to give it a bit more time. I think that's kind of his big, Achilles heel, if you will. But now he has an Achilles problem. So I guess that's his Achilles heel. So that's not a.
That was a good one.
He shouldn't be laughing. He's hurt, but that's a decent one anyway. Zing, So James Paxton, another guy who actually I have an interesting injury story about. He is being recommended Tommy John surgery. He's going to be out the season. He's been having forearm and or like different types of strains, flexor strains type things for quite some time now. And he throws very similarly to the way that I do. And it's kind of relaxed arm action, but at the end, it creates a lot of strain on your elbow because you're flicking the ball to get the velocity, and it allows you to get a lot of velocity and use, the maximum amount of strength in your body, and the ball comes out of your hand beautifully. But at the same time, if you put your elbow out too far in front and you lead with it, like instead of using the elbow as a connection to the rest of the arm and working on the strength in your lat to give you the extra velocity, that's something that he could have done to possibly take the pressure off the elbow, because then when your lat is strong, you can trust your shoulder strength and then keep the arm motion as one total group. But once you start, putting the elbow out further and further and further, you're eventually going to put your arm in a position where you max effort it and the elbow is out of place and you tear something. And I think that's what we saw happen here. If you watch the video and when he did get injured. So it looks like he's going to be out the season. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he hadn't had a tear for many seasons leading up to this, given how many elbow type and forearm type injuries that he's dealt with. I think that there's definitely something else that's been there for a while. So it is interesting. You see some guys who get Tommy John, they come back from it and their velocity's higher. He could be one of those guys. It's very realistic to think that he could be a guy who came back with a fastball velocity 1 or 2 clicks higher. And I've said this before, I think he's the same guy that he was before the juiced ball. I think the juiced ball affected him in 2019. I think he was hurt in 2020. I think he never got completely right from it. And now you're seeing how that's affecting him one start into the season. But what's really interesting is, and I have a story about this, is I actually, and I'm going to see if I can bring this up because this is a pretty cool little story. When he first got hurt for the Yankees, I contacted him on Instagram because I know that my throwing motion is exactly the same as his throwing motion. And I told him that you need to start working on your lat. And if you don't start working on your lat, you're going to put your arm at risk of tearing something in your elbow. And let me see if I can find it, because he didn't end up responding to me because, well, of course he didn't, right? But
Obviously.
at the same time, now seeing that this is happening, I'm like, dude, like, I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so. You know what I mean? But I love James Paxton. You know, he's one of the few Jameses in the major leagues. So, more of us, the better. I'm having trouble finding it. That's a shame. But yeah, no, and that like the thing is like I even told him like I told you so because he got injured after that point. But then when it ended up not really being the elbow, I was like, oh, okay, now I look like a fool. But now it's the elbow, and it might have been an incorrect injury evaluation or recovery path, and now here we are. Um, so I did contact him though. I will try and find it. Maybe we can link it at some point. That'd be pretty cool. But yeah, so it looks like he's going to be out for the season, and I mean that's basically the news for the week. I mean, I could say that you know what? Yeah, this I guess is news. Within the next week on saberscouts.com, I'm going to have the updated yearly top player list. Usually I do top 100s. And, I base my top prospects, that are going to come in and make a difference and be, really impactful. I base it off of, the top 100 players, or top 100 prospects in baseball. And I look at a lot of different lists and I do my own evaluation, et cetera, et cetera. But because of the pandemic, I've been able to not only check out each team's individual, top 30, top 50 prospects, and evaluate each of them. Give them their own day in the sun, if you will. Well, not full day, obviously, because so many players to evaluate, but enough time where I could figure out what they are, what's working about them, and how certain things about them are going to age. And you get the idea where I've had enough time because of this pandemic, because of the shortened season, that I've been able to focus on knowing all of these prospects throughout baseball, even ones that like are fairly obscure, as well as knowing the top performers at each minor league level, just to make sure that there's no performance guys that I'm missing out on, so to speak. But then also, I've had the opportunity to bring back into my studies pitchers. It's been a few years since I evaluated more than position players. I've been a position player analysis or analyst rather for quite some time. For I think it's going. I think when I started specializing in it was about 3 or 4 years ago. And because of the pandemic, I had such a good grasp on hitters that I was able to focus on pitchers. I was able to focus on prospects, and now outside of players that are internationally jumping onto the professional level, so to speak, and aside from people who are about to be drafted in the draft, which is something that I watch very closely, everyone is kind of accounted for. Pitchers, prospects, everyone. So this year's top player list is definitely, it's not a top 100, it's top 200, because we're including pitchers, we're including all these extra evaluations. And I also have an honorable mentions list for it, but it will be available on saberscouts.com this coming week. And perhaps the bigger thing is, because I'm putting in all this effort, because it's now the best non-fantasy baseball. It's real life. This is not just players that we're evaluating and deeming this good because they're going to put up this many fantasy points for me this season. This is real life evaluation. Because of that, and because we're including the prospects, we're including the pitchers this year, I'm going to be putting a little bit of a fee to access it. It'll be a one-time fee, not more than $10. I think we'll probably settle on about either $3 or $5, something along those lines. But yeah, it's going to be the best one that I've done so far. And in past years, I've had ridiculously high success rates with just position players. I think, at some point, Chris, we should do a show where we go team to team, and I could tell you who I missed on and who, I didn't miss on. Because there definitely are a lot of players that I missed on. But that being said, just because I don't like a guy doesn't mean that they're not going to put up some numbers at the big leagues. Because you got to remember, walks come on mistakes outside the zone, homers come on mistakes inside the zone. If you're strong enough and you can just hit mistakes hard, you can put yourself in a position where you will, hit 20 homers a season and walk enough to have some sort of on base percentage. So just because a guy is putting up numbers doesn't mean I have to like them. If they don't have the kind of approach that's going to hit high end pitching, if they can't run the bases good, so they're clogged on the bases, they're dependent on the pitcher making a mistake for them to do anything. I don't like that. I don't think people should, especially if it doesn't go with good defense, especially if, all you're really dealing with is someone who's strong. It's not my type of guy. So there are definitely some guys that I was like, I don't think this guy's more than, a fourth outfielder who could be a great platoon option. I thought that of Mark Canha. I was wrong. He ended up being a little bit more than that. He's a back end of the middle of the order hitter. Or if you want to use a guy who gets on base as much as he does as an on base machine, you could use him in the 2 spot. I suppose I don't like the idea of wasting his power potential. But I was wrong about him. I thought Paul Goldschmidt would be decent. I never thought he would be this. Baseball guy Sean, he totally called Paul Goldschmidt. Check out his channel. Very close friend of mine. We make a lot of content together. But yeah, no, there's a bunch of players where I definitely didn't call them. But I think, Chris, we got to do a show where we talk about the guys I didn't call, the guys I did call. Maybe we break it down team by team as the season goes on once we're done with these breakdowns. But
maybe we do a live stream special.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. That'd be pretty cool. We could have people maybe even coming in and be like, oh, well, did you see this guy coming? Did you see that guy coming? If anyone comes in, I'm very up for answering those questions because, I'll tell you, there's some guys who I definitely didn't see coming, but I have a very good track record. And that's why, I'm so big on my top player lists because year in and year out, it's the one thing I work on every single day. So yeah, when we talk about my passions with baseball, everything stems from knowing which players are the best and knowing why they're the best, how they work with each other. Everything stems from player evaluation. Everything stems from knowing how to evaluate players, because if you know how to evaluate players, you can extrapolate that to how they work together. You can extrapolate that to, the ballpark, the team. You can extrapolate that to, certain degrees of, aging curves, how long they're going to be effective, how that can work together. There's a lot of different sides of it. Also, approach and how that affects, how they're going to perform versus higher end pitching. So, I think that the player list is probably the best work that I do. And this year's player list is the most relevant and wide, reaching player list that I've ever done. I think I might even include with it a column where I talk about the guys who won't be in the big leagues this year, but who are either worthy of mention or who are just top prospects who I like. Because there's certainly guys who are not even on the top 100 prospects in the game who I am all about. And what I've seen recently is those guys eventually become top 100 prospects. So it's always cool to talk about them before they even get to that point. Like, for instance, just to name one off the top of my head, third base prospect for the Toronto Blue Jays, Miguel Geraldo. Love his swing mechanics. I like his glove. It's decent enough. His base running is very underrated. Contact hitter, but should also hit for power with the kind of mechanics that he has. He should also put on good muscle without slowing down. So very good player. I don't think that very many, if anyone, has him as a top 100 prospect in baseball right now. I think there's multiple people in his organization that are ranked as top 100 prospects over him. So, and I think he's better than them. I think he's one of the best prospects in the game. I think he's a top probably about a top 35 prospect in baseball, and he's not on the top 100s. So anyway, let's dig in real quick. We are doing once again our team rankings today. And what we do is we start in one division in one league, and we make our way to another division in the other league, and we talk about if we're doing the second place team in one, we do second place team in the other. And I think that might be the most clear way that I've ever explained our team rankings. So there you go. How about that? And before I get caught up in talking about any sort of other baseball info, because I could go on about all sorts of other stuff all day. The first team that we're going to talk about, because last week we did our fourth place team. So this week we are doing our third place teams in the American League West and in the National League West. So let's start with the American League West. American League West, our third place team is perpetually underrated by me. This is one of like two teams in baseball that I don't like the way that their hitters are typically go about hitting. I don't like their approaches. I don't like how they haven't really changed the way that they make teams up in ever. It's the same team basically that it's always been. That being said, every single year, even though I don't like them, because the regular season you face a lot of like pitchers who give you mistakes, a lot of arms that are like not doing the best, a lot of guys who are trying to figure out their stuff for the second half and whatnot. You end up dealing with a team like this getting a lot more runs than you'd think, a lot more walks, a lot of homers. In the regular season, that's how you get wins. You get people on base and then you hit a homer, and it doesn't really work in the playoffs. It's because homers are on mistakes, walks are on mistakes. But it'll get you somewhere during the regular season. So I wanted to put this team as the fourth in its division, but every single year they make me look stupid. So I have to put them as the third best team in their division instead of the fourth, because I'm absolutely sure that once again, they're going to overachieve my expectations because of the way that I evaluate players. I evaluate players based off of how good competition they can face and come out successful. And a lot of the time during the regular season, you face, guys who will miss outside the zone, guys who will miss inside the zone. And, when players are at their best, when pitchers are at their best, when you're facing the best competition, you don't really see too much of people missing their spots. Pitchers kind of rise to their occasion in that kind of way. Their stuff may not be great, but in big situations, you're either hitting your spots or they take you out of the game. So in the regular season, it's definitely very effective to have this type of strategy, but it's why Oakland has never really done it in the playoffs. The Moneyball formula, it works great for the regular season, but unless you can have all of these other skills, all these other balancing factors, it's not going to really get you too far. So that's why I have the Oakland Athletics as the third best team in the American League West. They have the same factors going for them that got them going during the Moneyball days. They have power. They have just enough defense. They have walks, so they have people on base percentage. They have a good young group of starters and bullpen full of weak contact, no names for the most part. And there you go. That's Oakland. That's always been their formula. And they've never deviated from it, even as year after year, it's been proven to just not work in the playoffs. Now, part of me is like, come on, guys, you're Moneyball. Take the next step. Part of me is, well, if they're going to continue to successfully, field teams that will win on a year-to-year basis, maybe they have to have, because of payroll constraints, obviously, a team that is only so good. And this is their formula to keep it so good and in competition. And they think that, over the long haul, every once in a while, they'll run into a group of players developed through their system, added to this formula, that they'll be able to go for a World Series. Like when they had Donaldson and Cespedes, if not for the Royals, I definitely think that they could have gone for a championship that year. So maybe that's their way of thinking here. But besides that year, I haven't seen an Oakland team that could really sniff a championship. Um, and it's the same thing. Like the young players. Okay, let's talk about the usual rotation. So the usual rotation in the back end, they have some sort of innings eating weak contact guy. It's the way Oakland always is. Chris Bassett, Mike Fiers. They're both with the team right now, and that's what they are. Now they're great at weak contact, specifically Bassett, but okay, that's kind of your what else do you have here? Okay, well, back in the day, it was like Tim Hudson, Barry Zito, Mark Mulder. Well, what do you have now? Well, they got Dalton Jeffries, who had a killer spring training. You're hoping that he has a good season. You have Jesus Luzardo, who I love. Watch out for Jesus Luzardo this year. Lefty ace. He throws hard for a lefty. I think we talk about this in previous episodes, where like 97 is actually hard for a lefty. So when you see Ohtani throwing 102, don't get it confused. It's not just it's hard for a starter; it's hard for a lefty too, and hard for a lefty starter. That's just Luzardo's incredible. He's got an electric arm. He's got good pitches. He's got a lot of control about where his pitches are going to go. Exceptionally high amount of control for somebody his age. And he's got enough pitch mix that he's not really like a two-pitch guy. He's going to actually be able to succeed. And then, of course, his physicality as he ages, because of his build and because of the kind of muscular structure he already has, he should be able to stay healthy for a full season now. But also he should be able to put on more muscle, possibly throw harder, and go deeper into games even, because the harder you throw when people do make contact, it's typically weaker contact, unless you're one of those really, really rare hitters with those great contact approaches and redirectional swings. And even then it's hard to hit some of these guys, specifically a guy like Luzardo. I mean, Luzardo, I could very well see him win a Cy Young at some point in his career. He's got that kind of arm. Now time will tell, but I'm a huge fan of him. So I don't have all bad things to say about Oakland, but what else do they have? Like Puck misses the strike zone so much that you're worried about him lasting as a starter. He might be a good reliever though. Caprillion, he's been hurt so much as a minor leaguer, and now he's in the big leagues. What? Or borderlining the big leagues? I mean, that's a little rushed, but this is a college arm you're talking about. I've always been a big James Caprillion fan. One hand because he was a Yankees prospect, and he looks really cool on the mound, throws really hard. Really good competitor. He's actually an excellent pitcher, but gotta also mention another James in the league. Cannot be a bad thing. So, but no, I mean, he also seems like a reliever. Frankie Montas, he could be a decent starter, but he also seems like a reliever. Sean Manaea, I thought he was going to be an ace when he was in the minors, but what we're looking at is he looks more of a 3-starter now that he's in the big leagues, and that's not really going to fly for me. I mean, at least with what else they have working for them. Look, if this team really wants to beef up things, they need it too. So they're really dependent on, maybe one of their young guys taking a huge step forward. Not that it can't happen, but it's the same pitching situation, as it's been for years. And that's not even to talk about it badly, because I just talked about the best part of their pitching staff, really. The bullpen is exceedingly bland, but full of interesting names. But that's kind of been their way of being, that they bring in these names and these bland players, and they get great performances out of their pen. So I'm kind of expecting more of that, especially from like guys that had big years last year, like Jake Diekman, former top prospects like Holmes, or if Caprillion does go to the bullpen, or if Puck does go to the bullpen. They did bring back Petit, who's another weak contact guy. They do have Sergio Romo back there. Trevor Rosenthal is now looking like he's going to be out for the year. So that's a bit of a punch to their team. But, it's their typical weak contact bullpen that, always seems to overachieve. Now, I think the reason why I don't like Oakland, because I've talked about not liking Oakland with a lot of people.
Mhm.
Like I don't like a team that doesn't change things up. It's never been because I don't like their pitching staff, although their bullpen always surprises me. So I've learned to kind of give it time. It's that I don't like their position player group. If you're looking at their position player group, they got Austin Allen at catcher, who hit great through the minor leagues, was never really reviewed as that great of a defensive catcher. And he's kind of there if like something goes wrong with Sean Murphy to have a bat in there, but he's not really a great defender. And even then, his bat seems a bit limited. Like he might be more of like 10%, 15% above league average than anything truly impactful, but that is good for catcher. So at least they have their insurance, guy at catcher. Now Sean Murphy's their regular catcher, and I want to specifically address something with him. He would be one of the best catchers and then one of the best players in the league if he could find a way of staying healthy. My guy cannot stay healthy. He has a worse health record than Nick Senzel. Like this, he has a kind of health record that Brendan Rodgers for the Rockies has. Like he'll be healthy for like maybe 60 games a season. That's not going to work. Okay. So I expect Austin Allen to get a lot of time. And what happens if he can't hit? What happens if he's a guy who just hit in the minors, because, quad A player, if you will, really knows how to hit if, you're giving him mistake pitches consistently, if his bat speed is able to hit you, if you're throwing the low 90s, but once you're in the high 90s, you can't do anything. Like there's risks with guys that are not top prospects because there are reasons why scouts don't like the profile. There's reasons why scouts, like if you're a catcher and you can hit, I think more scouts would like you. He's always been viewed as a guy who could kind of, maybe his first year while the league doesn't know him, be like 15% above league average. Once the league knows him, he's going to be about a league average hitter and a below average defender. So what's that, a backup catcher at best? So I think that they're kind of trying to get something out of him before the league knows him. They brought in Elvis Andrus, which I thought was a great move to get rid of Chris Davis and to bring in a guy who could, bunt the ball, could run, could play better defense for you, get more athletic. He's been around the league, with better lineup protection. Maybe he, brings back a little hitting. Maybe he's more like, 10% below league average instead of 15% below league average. That can work at shortstop with his defense and his base running. So I thought that was a decent move, but then you have to remember that like he's also, when you measure him against the other shortstops in the league, he's like what, the 16th best. So it's definitely an upgrade over having Chris Davis at DH, in my opinion, because Chris Davis just hits home runs or walks. Again, reliant on mistakes from the other team, which is a big thing that I won't even say thing. It's a frequent factor when evaluating any sort of Oakland A's staff, or not staff really, but lineup, their entire teams. They build their teams this way, where they're either going to walk or they're going to hit for homers. So they become reliant on the other pitcher making mistakes. You're not going to make a mistake for an entire lineup. You know what I mean? Like it'll happen once in a while, but you can't be doing that. That's why, like, when you look at teams like the Yankees, people talk about the Yankees being so boring, or you look at the Mets, people talking about, oh, this Mets offense is kind of boring. It's because you have too many people with similar approaches. It's not going to work for you, not in big games. And then, that makes for an unexciting team. Oh, it's, a game against the Orioles. They're going to do great. Oh, it's a game against the Rays. Better not watch. Like, do you really want to watch your team at all then? The Orioles are the teams that are exciting for you to do well against. Like, come on, man. Build a team with more like lineup balance, with more diversity, lefty, righty, aggressive hitters, patient hitters, hot and cold guys. Just this is baseball. It's not a computer. You know. Matt Chapman, I love his defense. I love his bat if it's used correctly. He's coming back from hip surgery, and I fear that as clearly by far the best player on the team, the most impactful player on the team, they might be putting too much on him too quick because, I mean, back in the day, it was a fairly serious surgery. So, but he's also, once again, a mistake hitter. So, like I said, like I don't have a problem with mistake hitters. I like Matt Chapman. It's you have to balance them out with other types. So I like the Andrus move, but even Andrus is like I said, this is like 16th best at his position. So you got Chapman coming back from injury. You hope the offense is going to be there. Don't ever worry about the defense being, still elite because he's just that good. They have Jed Lowry taking over second base. He hasn't played in like 3 years. So I don't like the guy. And he's also one of those guys who either walks or like hits a homer or a double. And that's kind of the worst part is that like, if you're going to be a guy who's dependent on a mistake inside the zone or a mistake outside the zone, when they make a mistake inside the zone, wouldn't you like more of an assurance for a homer if you're going for that profile? Well, Lowry doesn't even give you that assurance. It's either going to be a double or a homer. He's more of like a 15 homer guy. And now that he hasn't played in a few years, the juice ball isn't really, around anymore to benefit an older guy coming back. I don't think he's going to do well. Like back in the day when older guys missed a couple of years and they came back, it was just like, oh yeah, they're done. The juice ball, I think, revived a couple of guys. And now we have these different perceptions. I don't like him at all. They brought in Machin and they brought in Kemp basically to be contact hitters off the bench and hit singles so that they could score runs late innings. But you need guys who can run the bases in order to have that work really well for you. Outside that, they're just going to play the infield in. And when you hit a ball in front of them, they're going to throw you out at home. So I don't really know how that's going to work too well for them. They got 2 lefty first basemen, which is like, if you've ever watched PewDiePie, wow. Like, why would you go and like, why would you go and get 2 lefty first basemen, my guy? They're both good defenders. You can't play them at the same time. You got to put one of them at DH. Like it's one of those moments. It's like, what were you thinking? Roster management. But like, I guess like their idea here is that they have to have some sort of bat replace Chris Davis. I mean, you could have. Puig is still out there, my guy. Like you could go get Puig, and then you'd have a lefty first baseman. You'd be able to rotate your outfielders. Get some more, defense out there, and you'd put a righty into your lineup rather than another lefty. I mean, I don't know. I mean, this team seems already to be a bit double play prone to me. They're mistake hitters, and a lot of them are very slow. So why put now lefties onto the team? Like, maximize what you're doing here. It just seems like they're putting lefties for just the sake of, oh, lefties, now you have balance. No, you have to diversify the approaches, and you have to be able to put them in a lineup in a way that complements each other. Like, this is, I mean, I get it. Oakland's all about results. So if you're looking at these guys' results, Moreland puts up good results. Olsen puts up good results. Puig puts up good results. But if you look at Puig, like Puig is a very aggressive player. Puig is a very toolsy player. Puig, if the team's doing well, he does well. And when he does well, he can throw people out from the warning track at third. Like he can steal home. He can go first to third. Like he can do insane things. Okay. And those are legitimate skills that he has as a ball player, but they're not written in his end of the day stat line as an algorithm would print it out to you. So the algorithm is going to tell you, go get Mitch Moreland. That's why I have a problem with some of this stuff. There's not a lot of human thinking like clearly involved. Like, I don't. What are you doing? Sorry, it's just like I can't help. Anyway, Pinder's an interesting guy to have off the bench. I do want to talk about him. He's been a interesting player for a while because he's decently fast. He plays a lot of different positions. His swing speed at point of impact is pretty fantastic, but his hands are too active. They're too twitchy, and it doesn't create a situation where he can load properly, get into a balanced point, swing with all of his momentum without extra emotions going on. And I think it leads to too many pop-ups or ground balls. And I think if he can quiet his hands down or do something, loading with a bat flick or something along those lines, or do something where you're going like this.
Mm-hmm.
So when the pitch comes in, you go from here to back here. So you're already in a motion. I think if you're doing something like that, you quiet him down. Pinder could do great things. But as long as he's doing this much with his hands at the plate, he's going to close off himself from a lot because he's fast. He's about as fast as most people could be in the league. He's athletic. He can play a million different positions. He's strong. His bat speed's right up there with anyone. He even has decent contact skills for his, rest of his skill set. It's almost maddening watching him because if this was a guy who was just taught what to do with his hands, everything would change. So there's probably coaches that are trying to tell him to do it and he just can't do it in the box. I mean, what I would do is I'd do simulated games, and every time he get in the box and he would start doing that, I'd have, the pitcher, would have maybe like a bean bag or something. The pitcher would be allowed to, hit him with the bean bag anytime that just like, what are you doing? Stop it,
Yeah.
just don't do that. Something from Major League. Anytime you hit a ball in the air, a pop-up, you got to do 20 push-ups. Love that movie. I love that movie. Willie Mays Hayes here. All right. Talking about Willie Mays Hayes. Outfielders, yes. Not a fan of Piscotty. Seems like just a guy who's healthy and hits for a little bit of power because he's physically strong. Doesn't really do lots of little things well. He's just kind of strong, consistent, which is Oakland. They don't care about any of that little stuff. If you're strong and consistent, there you go. They have Greg Diekman on their 40 man, which is interesting. He strikes out a lot, but he's also a very impressive hitter in that, like, when he does make contact, it's some of the hardest contact that I've seen. And in a league that has Joey Gallo, wouldn't be surprised if Diekman was up in the second half of the season, given that Oakland loves their power hitters. And they don't really care about if you strike out so long as you walk. And the power's there. They have Canna. I referred to him earlier. He was a guy who I didn't think was going to be as good as he's been, and he's been very good. When the juice ball went away, I thought his power, was going to completely go away. And the out-of-play power dropped quite a bit off of the cliff. But he compensated for that by working the count deeper and walking more. I don't know how he's going to do an extra year removed from the juice ball being in the league, but the fact that he was able to compensate and foul pitches off to the degree that he was able to work the count and get to those walks makes me think that if you're fouling pitches off, you're just getting under it or just getting over it, depending on how you're fouling it off. But in his case, just getting under it. I think now, more years removed, or even just 1 year removed from the juice ball, he has a good enough eye there where I don't think he's going to walk as much, but I think the power out of play is going to come back at least a bit, even if it costs him a bit with regards to some of his in-play power. But Canna, he's kind of turned me into a bit of a believer, so I do got to say he's a decent player. And then, of course, there's Ramon, the cannon, if you will, Laureano, always throwing people out from ridiculous distances. Pretty fast runner, or at least he was. He's an interesting guy, because he's fast. He's not ridiculously fast, but he holds his speed very well. So it shows up faster than his peak sprint speed. I think that's something that people need to think about when they're analyzing sprint speed is how long can you hold the sprint speed? I think that really impacts your quality of base runner. Also, how quickly you get up to the peak sprint speed also really impacts things. So when you look at sprint speed, you got to remember how those factors play into things. But Ramon Laureano, he works the count. Without the juice ball, he wasn't doing as well, but also it was kind of like his sophomore slump year. I think that with his kind of swing, and how he gets out over his front leg with the level of athleticism that he has, I think that he's going to have a couple of really big years coming up. I think he could kind of be like this era's version of what Carlos Gomez did for a couple of years for, I believe, the Brewers. Except maybe without, the attitude problems. But yeah, Ramon Laureano is definitely a player that I dig on this roster, but he is also a patient mistake hitter, which is basically what Canna is. And basically how Piscotty succeeds is through home runs, through his power hitting. That's, again, mistakes in zone. You move throughout the roster. Olsen is a mistake hitter. Moreland is a first half hitter that's not going to really do them too well. Second half comes around, but he can be a mistake hitter when the bat speed slows. Jed Lowry is a mistake hitter. Last time he played, he was a mistake hitter. I don't think without multiple years of playing, he's not going to be the same mistake hitter, probably a worse version of it. Matt Chapman, he's a great player, but his approach is that of a patient bat. He's got enough bat speed where I think that there's sometimes where it's pitchers pitches and he's still able to hit them well. But you have to remember when you have across the roster this same type of approach, pitchers can get into rhythms, especially the talented ones who don't really miss their spots a lot and aren't going to give you mistakes. You're not going to win in the playoffs with this type of formula. You need to have more diversification. Now, Tampa Bay was able to find a way forward while being able to have mistake hitters. And they were able to do it because they coupled their great defense. They coupled their great pitching. Because they had the pitching that Oakland does. They have the defense that Oakland does. They have the patient approaches that Oakland does. But they decided, oh, well, if we go lefty, righty, lefty, righty, lefty, righty for our entire lineup, then on a game-to-game basis, our lefties do this much better against righties, and our righties do this much better against lefties. So it's going to throw off whatever pitchers are going, even if they're an elite pitcher, because the numbers that one guy will be putting up will be so much better against that type of arm. And they'll be thrown off by the fact that they have to go lefty, righty, lefty, righty. So then some of the righties will end up getting mistake pitches, which they can homer on because they have patient approaches. And same thing with lefties. Same way if you have the other guy on the mound. So that's how Tampa Bay was able to mitigate things by having lefties and righties kind of balance things out. But if you go through Oakland's entire lineup, Sean Murphy is a righty. Maybe, okay, Austin Allen's a lefty, but when the league adjusts to him, he's not really going to be as effective. Maybe they're hoping that, okay, well, Austin Allen's going to be our regular guy this year because Murphy gets hurt so much. Well, okay, maybe that's one lefty, but he's slow as heck. So even if you have a guy like him as a lefty, because he's the catcher, and naturally being slow, lefties pull the ball. Every hitter pulls the ball, especially hitters that have the kind of power that Austin Allen does. That's double play central for a team as slow as Oakland. So you have that situation there. Andrus is a righty. Chapman is a righty. They brought in Moreland, but like I said, Moreland's a first half guy. He's not really going to help them in the second half. Second half, he'll become more of a patient approach guy and becomes a little bit more pull heavy at that side of the season. So even more double plays. He's slow as all heck. Olsen, lefty, short, balances the lineup out a little bit more. but he's also a pull hitter who's slow as all heck when he's not hitting. So you do have a couple of lefties in the lineup, but that's it. Laureano's a righty, Canna's a righty, Piscotty is a righty, Pinder is a righty. I don't think that this is a team that when Moreland can't hit in the second half, every second half he can't hit, and when the league does adapt to Austin Allen, it could take 300 at bats, 350 at bats, but that's about how many at bats he's going to have by the end of the season. So maybe just this year he'll be effective, but then outside of a rookie and outside of a guy who only does well in the first half, you're putting all of the pressure from the left side on Olsen. And then you add on to the fact that all these guys are mistake hitters, so they're relying on pitchers making mistakes. You put on top of that most of these guys, some of these guys haven't played in years, Lowry, and then most of these guys are terrible base runners. So anything that could be turned into a double play will be. I don't see that this team could be much higher than third place. But that's kind of the thing. Like, if you're able to balance out this roster, if they were to get a different second baseman, if they were to get a different catcher, if they were to get a different DH, if they were to get a different right fielder, if they fixed just that, they could contend with the number one team in this division because they have the pitching to do it. They have some really great players on their team. It's just they've handicapped themselves. They've handcuffed themselves. They've put themselves in a position where you're just going to get your successes when the other team fails, or it's just going to be double plays, strikeouts, walks aren't that exciting. I mean, it's not the way that I would make a team, period. So, but like I said, if you get a new catcher, if you get a new DH, if you get a new second baseman, and you get a new right fielder, you can do as well as any team in Major League Baseball. So if you're an Oakland fan, try and push for that, I guess. Because 4 players away from being as good as any other team in baseball is kind of rare. So it's a team that manufactures pitching regularly. So they're definitely not nothing. And I don't want to say that they suck and all this stuff, because every single year they prove me wrong. And that's part of the reason why I ended up having them ranked 3rd instead of 4th, because every year they prove me wrong. Every single year they prove me wrong. But they need to fix their position player makeup. Mm-hmm. And I think that'll be about it for that team. National League West, we got our 3rd place team. I have it being the Arizona Diamondbacks. I think that the teams that we've already gone over in the division, they either have nothing or they are only composed of hitters. And the Diamondbacks have a deep lineup. They have some good defenders. They have pitchers. It's a much more well-rounded group. So where should we start? I'll start with pitchers. Why not? Yeah. They have Madison Bumgarner, who hasn't really been himself in a minute, but he's wanted to play in Arizona basically for years now, by his own admission. And he's coming back with like a chip on his shoulder, something to prove. I think it's possible that he's starting to get towards the end, but also as a guy who's playing a place that he's always wanted to play, a place where it's like so easy to get regular reps in, it's very possible he has a career resurgence and, is, once again, at minimum a 3-starter, maybe a 2-starter. If anywhere, a player's going to do that, it's going to be where they're most comfortable and where they can train the most and where they live. And that's all 3 for him. They also have Zach Gallen, who is kind of like a mini Kyle Hendricks, very competitive, gets lots of weak contact. He gets strikeouts when he needs to, but he's really all about that weak contact, pitch deep into games kind of game. I do think that he is going to be back from his forearm injury. I think he fractured it, I believe is what happened. I do think that he's going to be back, at some time before June. So he'll play, the majority of this season. And I think that, he's as good as Mad Bum, if not better than Mad Bum. He might be the Diamondbacks ace at this point in time. And then they also have Luke Weaver, who was like always a really good starter in the minors, and I think he's still trying to figure out who he is at the big leagues. Um, I kind of see an underrated year coming from him this year, more of like a 3 starter type stuff. And if those are your, 1, 2, and 3, Gallon, Mad Bum, and Weaver, and then you go to guys like Merrill Kelly, another guy who's trying to prove himself at the big leagues, and then Caleb Smith, you brought in him during the offseason, and he's a pretty good innings eater. So it's not like you don't have guys who can compete for you on a day-to-day basis in that rotation. And if you're looking in the bullpen, they got guys who can make the transition from the rotation to the bullpen, and I think will, like Widener. Swarzak could have a good year. Soria is on the IL. He'll be back. He's their closer. Clippard also, he was hurt for a little bit. I think he's back now. Ginkel's been showing a bit of progress as well. I know it's a funny name. They also have a couple of guys who are, like top prospects that, we've been wondering about how they're going to use them. JJ Bukowskis, which is another name where like I had to learn how to say it. Corbin Martin. Those guys, even Taylor Clark, these are guys who, John Duplante, is I believe how you say his name. These are guys who are going to be able to compete with each other and be legitimate pen factors. So I think, especially when you're taking guys who are former starters and moving them to relief roles. And then you do have guys who have been consistently good relievers for years on end, like Soria and Clippard. Even, Yon Lopez has shown a lot of promise recently. I think it's a very underrated roster. I think that it's a team that the bullpen is going to be good. The rotation is going to be plus. And then when you get into the position players, that's where things get kind of fun, because they got Carson Kelly, who's a young catcher trying to prove himself, former top prospect from the right side. They got Dalton Varsho, who should come up at some point in time in the season, who I got to see in the Arizona Fall League, and he's a fantastic hitter. He's got a good swing, and he's a lefty, can also play a little bit of outfield, so that's kind of cool. But they got both of them, one righty, one lefty, kind of competing for who's going to be the future at catcher. And while Varsho at least is in the minors, getting ready to be called up, they also have lefty Stephen Vogt to platoon with Carson Kelly a bit. So you have that lefty righty. Vogt did really good in San Francisco, and that's why Arizona brought him in, because Vogt is a pull hitter. Vogt is a lefty, and lefties don't really typically historically do well in San Francisco. But he had a good year in San Francisco, and lefties do well in the Diamondbacks ballpark in Chase Field. So they decided that they would bring him in, keep him in the same exact division where he did well, and just change the lineup protection, give him a better ballpark. So it's possible that Luke Voigt, no, Stephen Vogt. I used to call Stephen Vogt Stephen Voigt because there's a G in it. But yeah, no, sense, right? But it's Vogt. It's Vogt. And no, I do think that he could be a legitimately good hitter. Just one more year removed from the juiced ball, so it's worth watching him. In the infield, you have Nick Ahmed, who he went to high school with one of my friends, but also it's kind of cool. It's a cool little tidbit, but so I want to kind of be biased towards him. But like, there's certain players where it's like, cool your Jets. He hasn't really done too much so far. Well, if you look at Nick Ahmed, he gets better almost every single year of his career. And even without the juiced ball, he basically got better last year if you're looking at the peripherals. And then, he admitted that last year he was dealing with a shoulder problem to start the season. And if you look at his numbers, first month of the season, he was terrible. But after that point in time, Nick Ahmed basically turned into a 300 hitter who was capable of like a 20 homer season, 40 doubles. like he turned into a full-on force at the plate. So I'm really intrigued about what we're going to see about Nick Ahmed this year. It's possible that he's one of those guys where like nobody saw him coming. Well, I did. So I'm big on him this year, and I hope he really does, show more of that over a full year. And if he's only capable of showing that over even the first half, I'm all right with that, because that just shows, okay, well, he tired out. So now during the offseason, he has to put on more muscle, and then he'll do it next year. So, and I could see that being the case. He is pretty thin in the legs. You need leg strength to continue power hitting late in seasons. So, but we will see. We will see how it ends up turning out this year. He gets better every year. So maybe he has, a good year, but not quite that year this year. And then everybody's on him next year. And then it's just like, yo, I said this last year. We're like, oh, but no, you didn't, and all that stuff. Like, nah. I'm saying it now. They have Asdrubal Cabrera and they have Eduardo Escobar at second base and at third base. Two switch hitters. Some people compare them because their end of season lines look similar, but Eduardo Escobar is massively better than Asdrubal Cabrera. Doubles hitter, capable of hitting 20 plus homers. But like, my guy is an RBI machine. He's fairly equal from both the left side and the right side. And he's one of those guys where like he could have been on the 90s Yankees championship teams, where like every player in the lineup was either like a Derek Jeter superstar, or they were this like really gritty kind of guy who would get like 40 doubles and like 18 homers. And then, but just because the type of hitter that they were, they'd come away with like 108 RBIs on the season. And you could say, oh, no, it's just because the Yankees offense is so great. But no, it's because this guy happens to be an RBI guy. That's why the Yankees won those, like all of those World Series championships in the 90s. They did it because it wasn't just, guys who were surrounded by Jeter. No, it was all Eduardo Escobar types. It was all those types of guys. So I'm a big Escobar fan. Baseball guy Sean, that's another guy that baseball guy Sean saw coming before I did. So got to give him a little bit of credit right there. Does great content. Seriously, check him out. So then we got Ketel Marte, who right now he's on the injured list, but it looks like it's something that he should be back at some point, like early June at the latest from. So he'll still get a full season in. He'll be playing center field. I don't think he's going to get too much second base time now that Asdrubal is in the fold and with Escobar at third. But that's kind of their third switch hitter. And then, when Nick Ahmed did get hurt early on this year, the Diamondbacks felt comfortable enough promoting their top prospect, Geraldo Perdomo, another switch hitting infielder who I expect is probably going to replace Asdrubal Cabrera next year as like the switch hitting second baseman, to go along with Ketel Marte and to go along with Eduardo Escobar, to give them their multiple switch hitters. But it's similar to the strategy that the Rays were doing, where they're trying to get effectiveness versus righties, effectiveness versus lefties. And we talked earlier, they have a righty catcher option, they have a lefty catcher option, and they even have a lefty catcher option for the future for if that lefty catcher option doesn't work out. It's very much gearing up for those big games, having a lineup that is really hard to pitch against, and also having, pretty good defense and pretty good base running as well. They brought in Josh Rojas. I believe Rojas came from either the Marlins or the Astros. But he's a guy who's absolutely crushed the ball up through the minor leagues at basically every level. He can play multiple spots. He's kind of like a lefty version of JD Davis, which is really valuable, as if anyone who knows JD Davis knows that JD Davis is a decent power hitter, probably more of a doubles hitter, low 20 homer power hitter. But his value is that he can play third, second, first, left field, right field. He may not be able to play them that well, but if you can provide consistent offense and do that, you have a lot of value to a team. Now, currently the Mets are using him as their everyday third baseman. That's not really going to work long term. But as a lefty version of that, whatever righties are on the team that, you need to move some guys around for to give extra coverage for, AKA Nick Ahmed. Like say you move Escobar to short for a day, because there's a really tough righty on the mound, and you have Asdrubal go to third, and you have, Ketel Marte come in from the outfield, or maybe it's when, Perdomo's up, you don't have Asdrubal, you have Perdomo at short for Ahmed when there's a tough righty in, and you bring in Rojas for the outfield. It provides more coverage to have a guy who can play that many different positions, hit and bat lefty. It's a rare combination. They have Pavin Smith, another guy who can play first base, and they have Christian Walker, who is also a guy who can play first base. I think the idea there is if Christian Walker doesn't take a step forward at hitting righties, that when there's a tough righty on the mound, you bring in Pavin Smith and you platoon them. I don't really have a problem with that. Pavin Smith is an underrated player. He's a pretty good defender, contact hitter, knows how to walk. I think with multiple years in the league, he might be able to gain a little bit more power. But again, that's also pretty much the exact profile of Joey Votto when Joey Votto came up for the first time from the minor leagues. Nobody was expecting what Joey Votto became. Joey Votto was just a lefty, like basically a 6'2" guy. I think that's his height as well, who was expected to kind of platoon over at first base, be a decent defender, or walk, not strike out, and maybe in time he'd hit for power. And then Joey Votto turned into that. So I'm not exactly saying Pavin Smith will be Joey Votto, but we've been down this path before, and we've specifically been down this path before with Diamondbacks first baseman Goldschmidt. Kind of came out of nowhere. But either way, if you're going to bring in Pavin Smith, the easiest way to bring him in is in a platoon. Probably going to do that with Walker. They have Josh Van Meter, another guy who absolutely toasted the minor leagues, and a lefty hitter in his own right, as well as Andrew Young, who's a righty hitter who specializes in hitting lefty pitching. So whether you're using Andrew Young with Van Meter or with Rojas, that's going to balance quite a few things out, especially given the fact that you have three other key switch hitters in your lineup, a switch hitting top prospect, and then you have a righty shortstop, as well as one lefty, one righty catcher in that kind of situation, at least until the second lefty catcher is ready. So it's a very balanced offense, even through the use of the bench. And guys like Rojas and guys like Van Meter and guys like Young, they can also play the outfield, which is a pretty important consideration because you have Ketel Marte out right now, and you have Cole Calhoun, who got a torn meniscus this season. He's playing. He's already back. Oh my goodness. And you got David Peralta, but David Peralta, last few years, he's been up and down. He has suffered through some injuries. Not sure you also want to be throwing Tim Locastro quite now into everyday duty. I don't think he's quite ready. I don't think he's quite ready for that kind of role, even though he may be the fastest or one of the 3, 4, or 5 fastest players in baseball. He just doesn't get caught stealing ever. I think he's stolen now 28 bases in a row since coming up to the big leagues without being caught. And I think that's like either tied for it's either coming close to the record or it's tied for the record or something along those lines. He just steals, he doesn't get caught. However, he's a little bit more effective versus lefties, and I'd like to ease him into becoming an everyday player. The best way to do that is, I think, use him in combination with the corners, Calhoun and Peralta. But it's good to also have this type of coverage because he is a guy who can play center field. And given that Marte is out, he's getting some time now. Last trade deadline, I believe the Diamondbacks dealt with, I think it was the Reds to get Stuart Fairchild, who's a player who basically every single year of the minor leagues has gotten better. Strikeouts have gone up. He's maintained a certain level of power. He's learned how to pull certain levels of pitches. And he does have experience at multiple positions. So bringing him in as another righty, I think really helps balance things out. Because you do have all these lefties that can come in and play all these different positions, Rojas, Smith, Van Meter. So you need to have guys like Young. You need to have guys like Fairchild, guys like Locastro to kind of balance things out. You do have Nick Ahmed from the right side. He's a little bit more frequent than those. But even when you're looking at guys like Asdrubal and Escobar and Marte, important thing to remember with switch hitters is the majority of the time, because the majority of the time they're facing righties, they're batting from the left side. So you do have to make sure you do have some other righties in your lineup. Otherwise, similar to Oakland, you're going to be setting yourself up for a lot of double plays. Thankfully, this team is a lot faster than Oakland. And thankfully, their lineup is a lot better at balance between that whole lefty righty thing. I also think that they have a lot better hitting than Oakland does. Whereas Oakland is so dependent on walks or power. Ketel Marte can run the bases. Eduardo Escobar drives and runs with doubles, as does Asdrubal Cabrera. Nick Ahmed, he might be closing in on becoming a 300 hitter. So it's a completely different situation, I think, from a position player group in that kind of way than Oakland. And for this reason, I'm kind of big on the Diamondbacks. I don't think that they're going to contend, not in a realistic way. They might be a team that is good by, I'm going to say, the second half of the season. They're going to have some good stretches. Maybe even late into June, they're gonna start to really heat up, especially like July, August. They're gonna do really well in those months, but they're never gonna realistically contend. They're only gonna seem like they're gonna contend for a little bit of time because of the two teams ahead of them, which if you're a baseball fan, you already know what those two teams are. They are so good that the only hope that the Diamondbacks have of getting into the playoffs is as a second wild card team. So you're competing with the now really impressive Cardinals. I want to note that while we're here, Cardinals are looking more impressive by the day. As soon as I figured that out, I got to tell you guys, that's how it is. But they would also have to contend with. It's not just the Cardinals, because the Cardinals are right there contending with the Cubs. It could go either way, really. At least with the way things are looking now. But they're also contending with 4 teams in the National League East. The top 4. They all could be, depending on what goes on with injuries and whatnot, they could all be in that second wild card spot race. And I think it's too much competition for the Diamondbacks. Now, there is another side to this if you're a Diamondbacks fan. Not only is this a team that's going to be really fun to watch for the obvious reasons, lefty, righty, great defense, great base running, very clutch players across the roster. More than some level of pitching. Excuse me. But they also have, on top of that, a really talented farm system position player wise. Guys like Alec Thomas, guys like Corbin Carroll, guys like Christian Robinson, especially. And then Geraldo Perdomo, we were talking about him a second ago, switch hitting shortstop. There's a lot of young talent that I think is about to come up to the big leagues. And if they play their cards right on the trade market, on the free agent market over the next few years, they should be able to contend with the top 2 teams in that division. Just not this year. And that's why they're my 3rd place team in the National League West. I think that's it for me today. I don't want to go too much longer. We've been going for a bit. You got anything, Chris?
As always, the only thing I have at the end of every episode is make sure you check in the description, you're subscribing to James' newsletter, you're subscribing to the podcast, you're hitting up the YouTube. I mean, we're already planning another live stream now. I mean, look at that. At the beginning of this episode, we already got the idea for the next live stream. And honestly, soon coming is James's top player list. And that wasn't just news for the week. That's like big news.
Yeah, news for the year.
That's news for the year, dude.
Yeah.
Like that's huge news.
Comes out once a year, every year. Just once a year.
So it's like, come on. There's a lot happening this week. There's a lot going on. Make sure you stay tuned. And when we fully figure out what day we want to live stream, we will let you all know in advance. So, I mean, again, just stay tuned.
Yeah. See you on the next one.
Later.